On. Yeah, very good, very good. Well, this is the 5th of our talks. It's also currently the last one currently. And we're going to talk about the mammoth. But I want to take you back to our the Grand Canyon talk, or something I forgot to tell you that became interesting and amusing. Back in the late 1800s, before it was into 1900s, the Grand Canyon Village was still a tourist attraction for the nation. People came from everywhere to see the Grand Canyon, as they should. There was a man there at that time. He was a tour guide in the Grand Canyon. His name was John Hance. Supposedly, he had been a Civil War captain. He went by Captain John Hance. John Hance was an asbestos miner in the Grand Canyon. There's a trail up there called the Hance Trail, named after him. And it went down to some place that he dug ore out of the cliff sides of the Grand Canyon, but it was pretty hard work digging ore out and then hauling it up on mules to the top. So he had a gift for gab. He could talk. He really could talk. And so he became a tour guide at the South Rim. And he'd tell people Grand Canyon stories. And the question regularly came up is, what created the Grand Canyon? And he would comment in humor, I dug it. And everybody would find great humor and know that they had their little string pulled on them and they laughed. And nobody really paid attention to the subject. One time he told that story. And in the crowd, there was a 4-year-old girl. Bruce Babbitt told this story. Bruce Babbitt used to be Secretary of the Interior. People who remember stuff like that. He was Secretary of the Interior during some president, and he had also been the governor of Arizona, Bruce Babbitt. The 4-year-old girl asked this question, because he said that, I dug it. This question flipped into her head. Where'd you put all the dirt? Problem for John Hance. He didn't have an answer. This problem plagued him for the rest of his life because he had no answer. And on his deathbed, here he is. His family, I don't know what he had in the way of family. Family and friends are gathered around getting ready to say goodbye to John. And amongst the very last things he says was, where do you suppose I put all that dirt? Good question, huh? Well, we know where the dirt went now. When we see things differently, and there they couldn't see the Grand Canyon from the top. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that came into play that John Hance didn't have the advantage of. And he probably I'd say he'd probably like to find out where the dirt went. But we know. Today we're going to talk about mammoths. Some stuff about them. We'll never get... Of all the things I've talked about, this one was the most troubling on figuring out what to talk about in my thinking, because the subject within the subject is that there's lots to talk about, more than I talked about, or at least for me it was easier to talk about the other things than it has been to talk about this one, because of the volume of information, of detailed things that came along in the subject. Mr. Tanner. Could have been. Could have been.
Actually,
some people think I was old enough to be there and watch it, but I wasn't.
Actually, it was.
So, what do we know about mammoths? So the first thing we know about is they were big. They were big. Now, on the screen up there is a mammoth that was not big. It was a little mammoth. And it has the name Dima. They named it. It was an infant, and then it died in very poor health. This particular little mammoth did. Very poor health. His body was emaciated. His ribs were short. I mean, it was a bad case but yet it had died apparently in the flood because it is compressed down to thinness like this here. The whole carcass of this 6 to 8 month old young mammoth was squeezed down like this, compressed. Mammoths were big. Now, we don't know how big the absolute biggest mammoth ever was, but there is one mammoth that we did have sizes on it, and it's in the book. We showed the picture of the the river scene, Casey, where the mammoth is bobbing around seemingly in the current? That one right there, those are surveyors. This is an artist's depiction of the event. It had been a particularly difficult, wet summer, and the river channel itself had cut a new path as the water was eroding stuff away. And to the shock of all these surveyors, they looked out there and there was something in the water bobbing up and down in one place. The river was rushing along, and they found out it was the head of this mammoth sticking out of the water. So they attempted to pull it out. They had ponies, and they had a whole bunch of men, and they had all the survey team. They had a whole bunch of stuff. So they got ropes and chains and stuff, and they hooked it on it to attempt to pull it out. Well, they couldn't get it to move. Its front legs were free, and its head was bobbing up and down with that in the water, but its back legs were frozen to the bottom. And it wouldn't move. They couldn't get it to move. But as time went along, the water eroded away and melted the ice that held it in place, and it broke free, and they hooked these chains and stuff back on the mammoth. And they pulled it actually up onto the ice, and they said that the word was they had it like 20, 25 feet up onto the bank. And they cut the tusks off of it, and they did measurements on it. This particular mammoth was 13 feet tall and 15 feet long. Now, they had no way to weigh it, but it was exceedingly fat. And they cut the tusks off, and they had opened the stomach up of it, and it was filled with undigested vegetation, things that it had eaten, pine cones and grasses and a variety of other things that it was eating that it never got digested. That becomes important, so you want to hold that very thought, and we'll come back to it. But that's what they found with that mammoth. And then about 24 hours after they got it up onto the bank and did what work they did on it, the eroding qualities of the water undercut the bank caved down, and the mammoth went off out into the Arctic Ocean. But it was only the artist's work that they ended up with and everything at all. But it was a whooping. Think of our ceilings right here. I was looking at Zach up here this morning at 6 foot something or other. Double his height, Zach's height. That was the height of our mammoth. And I'll put 15 feet someplace right here to the wall. That's the size of our mammoth that they had there. Whether it's the absolute biggest one, we don't know that. Probably wasn't, statistically. And how many mammoths were there? That becomes a good question in the question thing. Were mammoths somewhat rare? Would you put the map up, Casey? Can you turn it? Is that possible? Okay. This is a depiction of, when it comes back up, this is a depiction of the Arctic. And on it, there's a whole bunch of red dots and some yellow dots. The red dots account for, this right in here, these red dots all here are mammoth finds, where they have found mammoths. And the yellow dots that are up there are woolly rhinoceros. This is the woolly mammoth and the woolly rhinoceros finds. Way more mammoth finds than rhinoceros finds. But there was a Russian agency back at some place, in, I don't remember exactly the date, in the mid-1900s, 1940, 1950, did a guesstimation of how many mammoths lived. Now this right here, there's, 70 or 80 different mammoths that they have actually documented the find of different parts of them. Only a couple of them were whole bodies where they could do anything with. There was parts of the feet, and there was bones, and there was tusks in here and there. And so they know that the mammoths had died there, but there was nothing left much to work with. A few of them, of these mammoths, they're actually able to do autopsies on. Now that became an important thing. But this Russian politician, it was something in geology and something in recording stuff for posterity, but he did a guesstimation based on the stuff that they'd been able to find, not just this, but other things that they'd been able to find all through this up in here, clear into Alaska. They estimated that the number of mammoth tusks that they had found was 500,000 tusks of mammoths that they had found. They extrapolated that, and that's by doing some math on the average weight of a tusk. They was able to extrapolate. They were able to help me with my word, extrapolate this information out, and they estimated in this zone up through here, there was something in the neighborhood of 5 million mammoths. Now, probably not all at the same time. Mammoths back even then probably grew old, died. But even if the number's high, that's a lot of mammoths. They must have probably couldn't go much of anywhere without seeing a mammoth someplace. It's probably like us seeing deer. And there was mammoths, lots of them. They weren't just up here in the upper Siberia, Alaska zone. They were all over Asia, Europe, down into North America, what we think of. And deep down as far as they found mammoth remains, as far south as Mexico City. So this phenomena that killed the mammoths and trapped them for us to look at it in the way that we look at them was a far-reaching, to think about it, a mammoth, Mexico City. And he's killed by the same phenomenon. Same phenomenon. So as the mammoths were up here, there was a zone up here. This whole zone, this is where they've done their research. Most of the mammoth, right here, you can sort of see a collection there and another layer over here. Now, why there's nothing in between, I don't know that. But this zone that goes through here has collected a lot of mammoths. Right up for here is the Arctic Circle. Above that, it goes up into, is that it, or is that the Arctic? Someplace up there. It's up there. Cold. So some of the things we know about the mammoths are this. I took a few notes this time. And the things that we know about mammoths. We got that, 5 million. There's a misnomer that goes with, I just shut my light off, keep a finger. Casey threatened me. Keep your finger off of the button. No, he didn't threaten me. Did you know that yesterday was Casey's birthday? Did anybody know that? You know what? How often do you get everybody together, a group like this? Casey, would you stand up? Stand up. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Casey. Happy birthday to you. Woo! He only looks one day over 36. So our mammoth, he is called a woolly mammoth, but that's a misnomer for his name. Calling him a woolly mammoth tells us what kind of coat he had on him. There was not wool on the mammoth. He had scraggly hair, wire-like hair, running in general 20 inches long, sparse. Thing about wool that makes wool, like a sheep, able to deal with cold very nicely is that in a sheep's, each filament of wool fibers, there's little scales, microscopic sized scales on the filaments of wool that they link together and make dead air pockets in the fur of the wool of the sheep. Mammoths have none of that. They had none of that at all. Most of the characters that live, the same is true for the woolly rhinoceros. And there's some other characters up there. Currently, this day, when animals that live up there, they don't have wool and they don't have long scraggly hair, they have fur. And this fur keeps them warm, even like caribou and stuff like that, muskox. These all have deep layers of fur and also deep fat. Now, extra fat doesn't always mean they were fat characters. Now, woolly mammoths were very fat. There was one mammoth up there, he was called the Adams mammoth, no relation, in case you were thinking you were connecting me to that. The Adams mammoth was so fat that his belly hung down below his knees. This indicates that he had extreme amounts of food available, and he ate it all. He ate all of it that he could get. So the mammoth, so they've been able to do autopsies on some of these. This mammoth up here is, and if I pronounce the name right, the Berezovkov mammoth. This is the most well-known mammoth going. It was found a long time ago to the point that they had to bring pony-drawn sleds, and it took a month to excavate him from the ice, of chipping him out. And they got him out, and the top of his head here was ate down to the bones by wolves. And his trunk, they left the trunk this way, they had eaten off the end of the trunk. But the rest of the mammoth, they brought it out and got it down back to the museum. Plato and taxidermists put him up. Right now, he is known as the most well-preserved mammoth in existence. And they were able to do that. And the other mammoths they took out, they found what they'd been eating. They were eating subtropical fruits and foods. They were eating pine cones. They were eating different kind of grasses and stuff that aren't even there no more where they live. The food that they ate then isn't there now, which leads us to some different conclusions. The food that they ate, some of it, the food was in their mouth and in their throats, unchewed and unswallowed. So whatever in the world happened to them to freeze them up happened so fast they couldn't get it done. And they know based on that food at about what time of the year the mammoths died. Isn't that interesting? So the Genesis flood started, we know, close to when it happened. That would be the end of, because of the foods that was in their stomach, the condition of the pine cones and stuff such as that. The mammoths that died, they died someplace at the end of July, beginning of August, based on food in their stomachs. So that's pretty good information, right? And it happened so fast they couldn't even get the stuff swallowed. And the food, we're going to come back to some of this, but we'll touch on it now. The food in their stomach was undigested from their last meal. So which leads us to believe, how in the world do you freeze something that some of them 13 foot tall, 15 foot long, and absolutely enormous. One of them, they excavated the stomach and they had 330 pounds of undigested food in its stomach. So how did it not, what happened so that it couldn't get digested? Because even if you kill something, if you don't open the carcass up, the animal that will rot right there. It'll begin rotting very soon. It'll begin rotting. So that's why they tell deer hunters, you got to get it opened up, get it the air to it, even if it's warmish out, even if it's kind of warm, get it opened up so that air will get in and it'll begin cooling the carcass and stop this beginning, the process. As soon as the animal dies, these decomposition things start right away. So this idea of you got to take care of that animal. Well, the mammoths didn't have anything, but yet the food never rotted in them. Digestion never was completed because the digestive acids would have just, for hours, maybe even a day later, it would have digested all that food and it wouldn't have been that way. But here we have all this undigested food in the carcass of the mammoth. And they know what killed the mammoth. Let's go back and make sure I get my thinking. Animals were thick and fat, invariably. And all this tells us that there was an abundant food there. There was food everywhere. And it wasn't just that they were fat. There was all sorts of characters around them that were fat that they were buried with. Let me read you this. It's easier to read this to you than it is to try and recite it to you. Listen to this partial listing of the animals buried. I'm working on it, Casey. I'm a project on this. This is a partial list of characters that were buried with the mammoth and close by them at the same levels. There was a tiger, antelopes, camels, horses, reindeers, giant beavers. I wonder what that looked like, a giant beaver. A fox, giant bison, giant ox, musk sheep, musk ox, donkeys. How about that? A donkey buried someplace close to a woolly mammoth. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? There was badgers, an ibex, woolly rhinoceroses, lynx, leopards, wolverines, Arctic hares, lions, elk, giant wolf, ground squirrels, cave hyena, bear, and many types of birds, all buried with the mammoth and close by them. Pretty amazing. All of these animals require an enormous, now just think about the 5 million mammoths all by itself and all the herds of other stuff, had to have an enormous amount of food available to them. Must have been almost tropical of what they had to live with. Another problem with this is that the water supply. Now, we don't know what mammoths drank. There ain't no mammoths, right? But we know what African Indian elephants, their drinking is. They require, an adult elephant needs 30 to 60 gallons of water a day because they have these huge body masses and they just need the water. So with the water not available in the vast majority of the year, for 10 months of the year, they have no liquid water up in this zone where they're at right now. That would have put the mammoth in a position he now has to chew up snow and or ice to get his 30 to 60 gallons of water every day. Now that becomes a problem. He would burn most of his calories from eating just in heating the water to body temperature. Now we have a problem. And it's only in a few months of the year that they have water that's probably running. Temperature that the mammoth lived in. Things that we know. We don't know exactly what it was like then, but we can get a gist on what it is now. In upper Siberia, average January temperatures are a minus 28 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. Now, this becomes a problem. Now, that's 60 degrees below freezing. I know what it's like at the temperatures we've had here with my nose and my ears if they're exposed. I know what that's like. But remember, now the mammoth doesn't have wool on him. He has this sparse, wire-like hair. Weak spot on an elephant is their nose, this trunk, especially young elephants. The warrior guy, the character in history named Hannibal, attempted to crawl across the Alps with 37 mammoths. Only one made it across. Just those temperatures killed 36 of the 37. And the mammoth, if you damage their trunk, the mammoth usually dies. If he somehow or other he gets injured to the point, or if not in this particular case, if it becomes frozen, frostbit. And we end up with, if you get frostbite and you don't take care of it, then you end up with gangrene. Such is the problem the mammoths would have. These cold temperatures would freeze them because they didn't have a protective covering. Yes, they had fat, but they didn't have covering over it. Like when we go out in the cold, we layer up with jackets and layers and stuff like that. Another problem for the mammoths where they live, right now for 6 months of the year, there's little sunlight. Very little sunlight. And during this time, nothing grows up there during this time. Nothing. I'm always amazed to hear in Post Falls, we can have a foot of snow on the ground, and if you dig down through it, you'll find green grass. And even now with the little bit of cold down to the mid-20s at night, grass is trying to grow. I'm amazed at that about my new North Idaho life. And so they were covered with ice and snow for 10 months. 10 months. And we know that some stuff about wild elephants today, that their foraging habits they are in the hunt for food for 16 hours a day. They are constantly in the habit of foraging. Just walk and eat, 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 walk and eat. And so the mammoths had the same kind of thing. There's a chart over here that gives us some information. Casey, would you go to that chart?
Yeah. Name of the book again?
Huh?
What's the name of the book?
In the beginning. You get cutting edge technology with me. Cutting edge technology. From 100 years ago.
Yeah, just a quick question, I think I need to do some of this timeline. So if the woolly mammoth had tropical fruit in their mouth, why did they have the wool
They didn't have wool.
or the fur?
They didn't have fur. They had scraggly, wire-like hair.
Okay. That's to keep them warm.
Probably not. It probably, I don't know what the world of a mammoth was like, cosmetic. And they got up every morning, combed its hair. I don't know. That's just what it had. That's what's been found on the animals that they've been able to collect them up and do autopsies on. Another little side thought on this thing. When flesh freezes the way we freeze things, it freezes somewhat slowly. And if it freezes slowly enough, at the cellular level, the cells burst and really facilitates decomposition very rapidly. By autopsies, frozen mammoths that they've been able to get stuff from and take care of it and do it, none of the cells are exploded, indicating super rapid freezing. Super rapid freezing. You still looking? Okay, there's a chart, we're going to come up here, and the chart tells us some stuff about what killed the mammoths and the rhinoceroses and other characters that they've been able to do autopsies on. Yeah, Vivian.
So it was 10 months where it was icy, and in 2 months they ate tropical fruit?
That's the way we have to draw a conclusion by today and what we know that the mammoths had an abundance of food. They didn't have a shortage of food. They didn't have these long Siberian winters. They did not have them. They had a lush, that's not the one, Casey. I don't know where it went, but don't worry. It's okay, don't worry about it.
So would we say that this earth was just different pre?
It was, we live on a day and age where there's we're told climate change is going on, right? There was a climate change from this lush tropical, at the very least, even if it wasn't fully tropical, it was very, very temperate. Very, very nice, because elephants themselves like a nice, even a hot environment. They do okay with super hot. Just give them enough water, they endure just fine. But they got to have the water. And what? That's right. That may well have been something they did up there, because the mosquitoes probably were up there also. Come back here. Let's see where that is. One of the things about the hair on the mammoth, long, shaggy, it went clear down to their feet. Now, if he was in a frozen environment where he was kicking through snow, the hair on the bottom of his feet that hung down that level would have been constantly being torn off or broke off or whatever because of getting tangled up in the cold. Not that one. But you're doing great. So he hung clear down to his toes. Another thing about mammoth hair is it wasn't hair like we think about it for a cold country animal. He had no erector muscles on the hair. Erector muscles are the same kind of things that birds have, like that would set up in a tree at sub-zero, and they can set up there and not be cold, or at least not freeze to death. No erector muscles to stand the hair up, to fluff the hair up, to make dead air pockets, to keep them warm. And there was also cold country animals, like the muskox, has oil glands in the skin. Mammoths had none of them. Oil glands are such that they keep the fur of like the muskox, they would keep the fur oily. Oily fur makes these pockets of air because it tends to want to collect air pockets. Those air pockets, but the big thick layer of fur that's on them, keeps them warm. Keeps them warm. So let's see, what do we got? So there's this whole thing here creates a number of problems. Northern Siberia is a cold, dry, desolate place. People up there, we have something in the neighborhood, in the book, it'll take you through it, there's something in the neighborhood of 100 different mammoth and partial mammoth. And sometimes all they find is a few bones and some skin. Very, very hard place to get to and find and work in. In the 10 months, when everything, 6 months, when everything's hard frozen, people just don't go there. There was probably hundreds, maybe thousands of mammoths that have came and went and got ate up by the predators, and nature took care of the bones and stuff like that. Tanner.
So, I just want to add that in my research with the Ice Age, there was a cousin named the Mastodon and the man.
This is true. Yeah, that's true. That is true. There's two versions of what we call mammoths. One of them is the woolly mammoth. There's a technical name for him. And then the other is called the Columbian mammoth. That is the mastodon. Seemingly, largely hairless. Seemingly. Genetically, they're very extremely close to one another, and they could have interbred. We don't know about the interbreeding habits of the mammoths and the mastodons if they crossed over zones, and they probably did. But we do know that on very rare cases, African elephants and Indian elephants have been known to interbreed. And genetically it works. Now, the one case that they know of this, that the little baby died shortly afterwards and didn't grow up into an adult. But it does happen. And so the two mammoths could conceivably have interbred. Good point. Good point. So they could have. We don't have any information about it. We don't have any of that.
Yeah, it's my research.
So we have this cold, dry environment. Vegetation does not grow there vast majority of the year. We have these miserable dark winters for the mammoth to try to live in. And how could millions of mammoths plus all these other animals that require all of this food have survived to be in the, you might call it the record of things that they've found bodies of? How could they have done that with a cold environment the way we have now? The mammoth, we found them because of the food that's in their stomach, in their throats, and some of it in their mouth, caught in such a way, and they were froze that way. That's how they were frozen. Not only they were froze that way,
So you were talking about it being cold like 10 months of the year, but that's just now, right? Because
that's currently, that's what we know now.
before the flood, it wouldn't have been as cold, so that's why they wouldn't have needed the fur like you're talking about, because it wouldn't have been cold induced.
No, very temperate climate. Very temperate climate, almost subtropical, because of the way the food was there. There's some other reasons we can look at that. We're going to talk about them. We'll see if we can get there. Andy.
Didn't they find tropical plants and fruit about 500 feet under the ice in the Arctic?
We're on our way there. Thank you. We're on our way there. Yeah, very good. I like it. I like it. They're well read. Let me go back. I forgot to do this when we started. I want to do it now. Why should we, remember when I had on my other chart the picture of the cross on the platform? And I asked you the question, there was the two things that holds our Christian faith up. One of them is the Old Testament, Genesis chapters 1 through 11. And on the New Testament, it's the resurrection. These things hold our faith together. If you can break down either one of them, you ruin the faith. Now, Genesis doesn't talk about the geology of the Genesis flood, but it talks about Noah. He says, just as things, Matthew chapter 24, just as things were in the days of Noah, he verified that and validified it. He said, just as it was in the days of Noah, it's going to happen again. There's going to be something happen similar. Not with a flood, but the rapidness of it. And learn about the resurrection. Listen to this. 1 Peter 3:15. But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Listen to this next phrase, next statement. Some of you already know it. Always ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. Gentleness, there's two phrases here, that gentleness and reverence. Gentleness to the person you're speaking to and probably has a differing opinion. Gentleness. And reverence, that you're speaking in behalf of God when you go in defense of your faith. Good verse to put to memory, 1 Peter 3:15. This rapid burial, frozen, and held in place, captured for us these thousands of years later, so we can look in on them. They've actually found the mammoth. There's no known account of anybody eating frozen mammoth. Nobody is known to have done that. Now, could somebody have done? You had some frozen mammoth, Bert?
Yeah. About 1961 in high school, a excursion team in Russia discovered mammoths, and they team went up there, and one of the big things they made a point of is they actually removed some meat and ate it.
Woohoo! I'd try it.
Perfectly well deserved.
I would try it. If I had an opportunity to eat mammoth steaks or mammoth stew. Tastes just like, yeah, chicken, right? Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, so that's the first account I've heard of that right there.
Around 61 was a big thing.
Yeah. So, the thing we know about the mammoths is virtually all of them were frozen solid and captured in a material they were froze in called muck, M-U-C-K. They were locked in this frozen muck. And it caught them in such a way, totally by surprise. Like the one mammoth we saw in the river, it was standing upright. And probably, I don't know, weekdays earlier than that, it was totally encased in this frozen muck. So what is muck? Walt Brown didn't go into any explanation about all the mysteries. There's mysteries associated with muck. They can't identify. They can tell you what it's made out of. Dirt sediments plus vegetable and animal matter still locked into all that. And the animals are in it. So how did muck come about? Well, let's go back to our first talk when we had the fountains of the great deep bursting forth out of the earth. And it rips open the earth and splits around the earth at that 46,600-mile mountain range that's in the oceans. Most of it's in the ocean. Part of the stuff comes up to our Pacific coastline here in America. We call it the coastal range. As this thing split up, it's eroding away granite and basalt together. 2 parts of granite, roughly speaking, is 2 parts of granite and 1 part of basalt for volume that's on the world right now. Sediments on the earth right now are sedimentary rock is 2 parts granite, 1 part basalt rock. And we're not going to go back through that particular thing. But as this stuff, early material, blasts off and some of it goes clear to space, pretty soon the stuff is rolling out, coming on the ground. We have the sedimentary layers, but in between that, there's stuff that's being blown. This muddy mixture of stuff is being blown up above our atmosphere, but not out of the reach of gravity. Above our atmosphere and but not out of the reach of gravity. So it blew this muddy stuff, muck, up into this, I don't know, probably some technical troposphere. I don't know what it is. Anyways, there's a name for the stuff out there. It has a name. I just don't remember what it is. And gravity, now it's froze solid up here. Well, we know what the temperatures are. You go out to these distances, and the temperatures now are 150, 170, and more degrees below zero. So now, we now start getting an explanation of why we can find frozen mammoths without their cells exploded, food in their stomach undigested, food in their mouth unswallowed, and in their throats unswallowed. What would do that? 150 degree below zero and more might just do it. It would, as this stuff fell to earth, it fell in avalanche fashion. Casey, did you ever find that picture of that thing in...
I've got, they didn't have any video of it happening, but I've got a video of the aftermath.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story that I read about in the Weather Channel. It gives these little stories they'll give you about different things on the earth, and they'll give you... Well, there was, it's probably been, it was before we came up here, so I'll say this 4 years ago. There was a story that came through that in Guadalajara, Mexico, a storm came through, a low-pressure system, and hailed in Guadalajara, Mexico. And it hailed 4 foot of hail. They showed video of this thing going down the river of moving river of hail going this one street they showed. And it was hail, and it was 4 feet deep. And it did that in 1 hour. So could hail fall down, catch the mammoth in such a way to do that to him? Yes, it could. Yes, it could. Go back to that big mammoth, that mounted mammoth. This mammoth is called the Berezovkov mammoth, and it's based on that mammoth right there. It was found by a river in Siberia called the Berezovkov. If I'm pronouncing it, it probably doesn't sound at all the way they say it. The Berezovkov River in Siberia. That's where they found this one. The thing about this mammoth that becomes interesting is, first of all, parts of him were ate off. We know that. But back here, you can't see it, but his back legs back here on both sides are folded up under his body, and he's fallen down onto his back legs. The front legs up here are extended out like he lost his footing and fell backwards, and his feet stayed in place in the front. This right leg right here had, they said, 12 fractures in it, compression fractures that would only occur by pressing down. Not because like he fell off of something and his leg was broke, like he fell into a crevasse and he broke his leg that way. The only way this one could do that is if the legs were locked in position by some force that would gather around them and hold them, as the rest of the material was still. Remember our 4 foot of hail in Guadalajara in 1 hour? What if it was 4 foot of hail in 5 minutes? This muddy muck that fell out of the sky in avalanche fashion. It caught his leg, supported his leg so that the leg can't now bend, and weight goes up over the mammoth, accumulated by the tons over his back, crushed him down. His back, he doesn't show it here, but his back is distorted down, bent down, showing that the center and the places between his legs caved in. He caved in the center, and he bulged out. And weight comes down, and it breaks the leg a dozen places, but the leg isn't bent over. But it has a dozen compression fractures down that leg. And it had to have been supported. There's stuff in the books that talks about that they'll take you through it better than I'm doing it. All of this goes back to that muck, because that's what he dug this character out of. They dug him out of muck. So how did muck form? Well, as it blasted, the fountains of the great deep burst forth and come about. Is they taken this material? Where the organic material? Walt doesn't attempt to explain that. He doesn't attempt to explain it, and I have no explanation either. How he got animal matter, a little bit of vegetable matter, I can kind of get a picture of how that would have been here, but animal matter, DNA, I don't know. Some of this stuff I just don't know. And I'll say Walt probably doesn't understand some of it either. He's probably got his own set of questions. But the mammoth was trapped. And this one here, they were able to do autopsies on him. And they know what killed this mammoth. Any guesses from people, those in the group that would attempt to raise their hand? So I know some of you never raise your hand. I know that. What do you think killed the mammoth? Being buried alive. That's it. We call the word suffocation. He had this enormous weight fall on his back. He couldn't lift his lung, and he probably was dead in, I don't know, less than a minute. He couldn't get so much weight on him, he couldn't lift his lungs to get another breath because of the weight on his back of this tonnage of muck that came down and kept building up, higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. And he was trapped under it until that day in the whatever the date was. They found him and was able to dig him out, and we have him, we can look at. This is in a museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. That's where this character's at. They have a mammoth museum there that deals specifically with mammoths. There was no comments on where he found it. They found him where he had been exposed. The surface had melted away and exposed him, which is why they found out that he had the top of his head and his trunk was eaten off by wolves. So they didn't know any of that, yeah. Probably as he froze, he was completely protected in case for these millenniums since then. And as the stuff off the top of him melted away eventually, exposing the top of his head. Most of these animals up here get eaten up by predators. That's what happens to them. And it doesn't take real long. Once the animal is exposed, the predators eat them. Easy meals. Easy meals. And such was this one here. The top of his head was eaten off and the trunk eaten away. They left the trunk for purposes, I suppose, to show the point. And they, in the book, they tell you that the top of his head was eaten away, and by means of them doing taxidermy work, they was able to reconstruct the head.
So wouldn't mammoth be a just be an elephant, just air? Air elephant?
They probably genetically, that's a very good point. They were an elephant of its day, and the elephants that we have now, Indian and African, probably were living in a tropical zone someplace else. And they were all on the ark. There was a woolly mammoth on the ark. Because it tells us that every living mammal was on the ark in their pairs, male and female. Cleans, 7 pairs. Uncleans, 1 pair. We're told that in the Genesis story.
Well, 2 of every kind, so an elephant kind, right? So it could be the African elephant, the Asian elephant, the mammoth, they're all of the same kind, right?
It could conceivably be, yes. But they probably didn't have a full-grown, 13-foot tall, 15-foot long woolly mammoth on the ark. They probably had baby mammoths. The same way with the T-Rex. T-Rexes were on the ark. Apatosauruses were on the ark, but not big ones. They probably had infants, young ones, kid mammoths. Good, thank you. So I just lost my train of thought. It just went away. We'll go with this, and maybe I'll get my thought back.
If they had younger animals on the ark, how long was the ark?
We know the dimensions of the ark by the cubit measurements they've given it. And based on an 18-inch cubit, the ark was 450 feet long.
Like how old would that animal be?
Oh, I don't know that. It was a year. They were on the ark a year. So, and the speculation is how they this is not even part of my talk. Speculation on how they handled with the animal refuse. And there's even speculation at the very bottom of the ark, because it was done in 3 stories, that the bottom of it was in effect a latrine that generated heat. It's probably a lot of smell, but pretty soon you don't even smell that. If you've ever lived on a farm, you don't think about those things. It's just what goes on. And so they just down in there, they probably had holes, they pushed stuff. I don't know how that all worked. Different subject. Good question, though. What do you do with all this stuff? And the food for them, they put them to sleep for a year? Maybe. Put them lay down and take a long hibernation type of rest. I don't know. So I just lost that train of thought. It seemed like a good one. Did I say anything? So the muck was blown up. This isn't it, but the muck was blown up as it comes over. It catches the animals. Oh, I know where it's going. Thank you. Very good. Casey, turn to that picture of the riverbanks. Pick one. Up in Siberia, the river's up there. Oh, that's a good one. We'll talk about that. Yeah. It says. There's another picture like this one. This one is some fish. There's another one here. And oxen trapped in ice. These are artist depictions of it. They didn't take pictures of this. But some very reputable people mentions them. And the thing about this that becomes interesting is how could fish get caught in that other picture? How could fish get caught swimming in their river? Think of salmon going upstream. And that salmon were caught in motion in the river. This right here, this troop of wild oxen were crossing this river, and the river froze, congealed around them, and stopped them right where they were. Now, some stuff we know about this, it becomes an interesting thing. is we know some stuff about water. Water reaches its maximum density, that's a key word, its density at 39.6 degrees. Water is at its densest. As it begins getting colder, it gets less dense. At 38 degrees, water gets lighter. That water, if you could separate them and hold them apart, that water would float on top of the other water because it's less dense. And it goes down that direction, aiming towards 32 degrees, where it would actually freeze up. So at 39.6 degrees, water is its densest. As it approaches 32, the water gets lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter down to 32 degrees. Then it turns into an ice, which is why our ice cubes float. If it goes to what you would think is the natural progression, it gets 39.6, and it keeps colder, colder, denser, 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 down to it gets down. Now the frozen water would go to the bottom and freeze its way up. All lakes would freeze solid within a few years of being completely froze solid, and any summer water that would thaw on the top, the water itself would protect it from the ice below from thawing. Our lakes would all be dead. The earth would be dead. The earth would have no life in it if this phenomena that God, I would just say this is a supernatural thing God did to make water lightest or most dense at 39.6, and as it gets colder, it gets less dense. So that's why our lakes freeze from the top going down. And the longer the cold season, the heavier the cold, the deeper it gets. But the more ice you get, it protects. Protects, the thicker ice, even more protection. More protection. It has its own insulating factor on it. So if this ice that fell up there, this muck ice, now how this one froze clear ice, I don't know that. But the water was froze about 150 degrees, 175 degrees. There's a couple temperatures in here that they talk about, of temperatures that came out of our farthest reaches of our upper atmosphere, fell out of there and brought these temperatures down to ground level, captured our mammoths in such a way that they're preserved for us, trapped in this muck, and froze bodies of water like this, where the fish were literally caught probably, and it congealed up in just a short time. How cold was it really? Well, nobody knows that. There's nobody there. Nobody there. And there's the picture. Now, these fish, they said in the article in here, that these fish were taken out by the guys, these are road builders in Siberia. They opened this lens up as they cut it away, and it exposed this. They actually took the fish out and they actually ate them. They were probably some kind of a salmonoid of something. They took them out, and because this is fall, salmon season time, the runs were going on, all that stuff was going on. And they took it out and ate it, and it says it ate very well. I'd get into that. Having me some prehistoric salmon. So,
You'd have to cook it first.
say what?
You'd have to cook the salmon first.
And they fed it, mammoths, they would feed them to their dogs, by the way. That's what they did when some of the stuff they got out, they chop it up and feed it to the animals. Humans, that was a good story, though. I wouldn't mind trying mammoth steak or maybe mammoth stew. Okay, there's a picture of the rivers with the logs on them. That one right there, that's a good enough one. This is a river that flows, I remember the rivers up there flow north. On these rivers, there's another one that they have a picture of two different rivers, the banks covered with wood. But none of the wood grows there. None of the wood grows in this place. As the river erodes itself away, it is exposing these tropical forests of trees, big trees, that were trapped there. And as the river thawed the stuff, it broke them loose. Now this wood up in this zone up here, because they don't have any natural wood, it just doesn't exist. Their wood for their construction and their heating comes off of this, that they in the book tells you that it's called fossil wood. Fossil wood. They've done exploration stuff. There's another little thing I'm going to read for you here about this wood. This is from oil prospectors. They were drilling in Alaska. That's where this particular scene goes up. Walt Brown reads part of this, and I'll just read you this stuff. It's 2 sentences. Oil prospectors drilling through Alaskan muck drilling through the muck. They have drilled through the muck up in some places 4,000 feet of going through muck and never broke through it. Okay, hold that thought. Having brought up an 18-inch long chunk of tree trunk from almost 1,000 feet below the surface. It wasn't petrified. It was frozen. They brought it up, and here's this 1,000-foot down chunk of tree brought up out of the ground. Remember, I go back to our mammoth now. We don't want to focus on the wood and lose track of the mammoth. It's the mammoth is what's giving us our information. The forests were hundreds of miles away, and there's an author here, a fellow named Williams. Williams describes similar discoveries in Alaska. This is Williams now. Through the ground is frozen for 1,900 feet down from the surface at Poudreau Bay, which I don't know where that's at. Everywhere the oil companies drilled through this area, they discovered an ancient tropical forest. It was in frozen state, not in petrified. It is between 1,100 feet and 1,700 feet down. There were palm trees, pine trees, tropical foliage, great profusion. In fact, they found them lapped all over each other, just as though they had fallen in that position. Under some of those mammoths, they found other characters under their feet that are not tropical characters. Little voles and just different things. They found them. And our mammoth got trapped by this phenomena stuff called muck. Bill.
So we know that today's climate up there is far different than it was during this period. Did that climate change because of continental shift that caused a lot of the continents to drift further apart? Were these areas drifting further north? Put them in that colder climate?
This was going on, I'll just say, at the beginning of the eruption phase, where the stuff was blown into the atmosphere, froze, and started falling back and capturing stuff planet-wide. And it probably was planet-wide. It wasn't just Alaska. It's just now that's where it's endured. And there's another thing, that's another topic for another time, is this shift of the tilt of the earth that makes some of this cold still possible up there. Another time, another day, we'll maybe get back and we'll have another session of teaching time where we can talk about some of these other phenomena. Earthquakes, another topic we can bring back up since this big earthquake in Turkey has got everybody's attention. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm confused on the timeline of everything. So this book is suggesting that there was a huge 1,500 to 2,000 foot thing that fell over the face of the earth, and then it rained the flood water on top of that?
The muck would have fallen through it all because it's weight. Water, if you take and put an ice cube, 10% of an ice cube is out of, Casey.
It's accumulated residue. So the muck is not 1,000-foot chunk of muck. It is like raining mud.
Yes.
It accumulates into 1,000.
It is raining it out of the sky in frozen form and collecting on the earth. There's other places it's not frozen. There's other stuff, there's some trick names in it called Yadomi or something like that, where all it is, in effect, dried version of the frozen muck that they captured the animals in. And we are out of time, and I kind of got through what we had to talk about today, but there's more to talk about in mammoths and stuff like that. There's more. Any one of the subjects is worthy of all of our attention to talk about more.
I'll dig into the mastodon.
Mastodons.
I'll dig into it.
Okay, you dig in, report back. Will you report back to me?
I can't. Recording for
Okay, let's have a prayer and then we're going to be done. Oh, I got to tell you another little short story. I know this is a short story that you'll like because it's important. David and Gary, Gary. David and Gary, this is a long time before I ever got here, and they were both more able than they are now. They decided they had a missions project that they wanted to take on and generate some funds for, so they decided they were going to cut cordwood and sell cordwood. And so they says, we need a chainsaw. They went and bought a chainsaw, started cutting their cordwood, and at the end of the first day of cutting cordwood, they were incensed and infuriated with the fact that they barely got a cord of wood cut, a half cord of wood, I think it was. So they get up in arms. They go storming down to the chainsaw store and go in there and get that guy. And he says, this thing doesn't work. And he says, what's wrong with my chainsaw? How come I barely got a half cord of wood? The guy says, well, let's put it up here in the bench. He's checked the fluids, grabbed the handle, pulled the handle. It starts up instantly. And Dave and Gary say in unison, what's that noise? I guess you had to be there, huh? But I got a lot of them with it. Let's have a prayer and then we're done. Thank you for your attention and your good questions. And how many here made it all through all 5 of my little talk times? All 5 of them? Oh, very good. Very good. Thank you. Jesus, thank you for the amazing evidence you left behind us that we can see you in. Even this sort of a fun topic about woolly mammoths. And thank you again, your care for us. You left us with faith that we can believe in you without seeing anything. But you gave us so much that we can see and increase our faith. So thank you for all that you do in our lives. Thank you for caring for us. Thank you for your salvation that came by no other way than your life, Jesus. Thank you for that. And that we would be good representatives of you as we go on through our life to be able to give an explanation for our faith. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.